You're live, Your Worship.
All right, thank you very much, Clerk Helmke. Everybody, welcome to a special council meeting here for Clearview Township Council. It's Monday, October the 18th. We have a special council meeting at 8:30 tonight. It's a special council meeting in regards to a public meeting about development charges. So it's a very simple agenda, but I do still have an agenda to follow. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody, all of our staff, and we do have an associate joining us, Mr. Abbs from Watson and Associates. So we'll be introducing Daryl in just a minute. Council, I have the approval of the agenda. Recommendation be it resolved that Council of the Township of Clearview hereby approve the agenda dated October 18th, 2021 as presented. And I have a mover and seconder on the motion. Okay, Mr. Broderick and Ms. Deneen. And if there's any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the motion. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that Mr. Burton, our deputy mayor, has advised me he won't be able to join us tonight. So he is not on the call, but he will certainly check in on this meeting a little later on YouTube. Disclosure, pecuniary interest, and general nature thereof. Anybody with a disclosure at this time? All right. Seeing none. If anything comes up during the meeting, as always, we will deal with it immediately. Please bring it forward. And so at this time, we're going to move to item number 3, which is our public meeting. And as part of our public meeting, I'm going to now read the script for the opening of the public meeting. We will now initiate the public meeting portion of tonight's agenda. This public meeting is being held pursuant to Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997 as amended, to present and obtain public input on the municipality's proposed development charges amending bylaw and underlying background study. As identified in the notice of public meeting, please be advised that your written and oral comments will form part of the public record. Your communication and any personal information therein will be made available to the public. The following public meeting will involve a brief presentation by the township's consultant, Watson and Associates, including a brief explanation of any written comments received, a period for public comments or questions, if any, and an opportunity for members of council to pose questions. So at this time, I would like to introduce someone to you that council you've all met, I'm sure, through our virtual sessions, Mr. Daryl Abbs from Watson and Associates. And he's going to be giving us our presentation on the development charges update study. So at this time, I'll welcome Daryl. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. And thank you to council for having me here this evening. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. So you're going to lead the entire session. So then at this time, I'll pass the public meeting portion directly over to you, Mr. Abbs. Go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to share my screen. So welcome everyone, council and members of the public who are watching this evening. Tonight we're going to be presenting an overview of the development charge update study that the township has undertaken over the last few months. This study is to update the 2019 development charge study that was undertaken a couple of years ago. And I'll go through a little bit of why we're updating the study in 2021, what some of the reasons are, and what some of the changes are going to be to the calculations and to the township's DC bylaw. So as Mr. Mayor has provided the opening remarks to this meeting, for the remainder of the meeting, we'll be going over my presentation on what the proposed policies are and the calculated development charges. We would hear from any presentations from the public or questions from the public, and then any questions or comments, discussion from council, and then we will formally conclude the public meeting. So the public meeting tonight, it's a mandatory requirement under the Development Charges Act. It's part of the public process subsequent to releasing the study to allow the public and council a chance to ask questions and further understand the background study that was released. So part of the purpose of why we're undertaking this update study in 2021, mainly two reasons. First is the legislative changes, and I'll go over them a little bit at a higher level in a couple slides. But there was a number of bills passed over the last 2 years since the 2019 background study was released. And these bills amended the legislation for development charges and provided a number of policy matters that need to be incorporated into the bylaw. In addition, some of these changes have altered the required methodology for the calculations. The first bullet there being removal of a mandatory 10% deduction that used to be required in the calculations. Parking services is no longer listed as an eligible service under the Development Charges Act. So as of September 18th, 2022, the township will no longer be able to collect for parking development charges. So some of the modifications we're making to the bylaw will be to separate out parking into a separate schedule so that that separate schedule will no longer be charged as of September 18th, 2022. As part of ongoing discussions with the development community in Stayner, to clarify some of the charges, what we're doing is also separating out water and wastewater into the various components of the development charge. So for water, we're separating it out into water supply versus the water distribution components. And then for wastewater, the treatment versus the collection. There's some updated costs related to fire services, water, wastewater, and stormwater services. And then, as I mentioned, some policy changes arising from the amending legislation over the last couple of years. And so prior to council considering the bylaw, the background study must be prepared and made available to the public, put on the township's website at least 60 days or 2 months prior to the bylaw passage date. Okay, and we've released the study, and I'll talk about the timelines in a second, but we released the main study on August 4th, 2021. And so just to discuss some of the timelines of the study process that we've undertaken. In June, July, in the summer, we initiated the process with the township. We started having meetings and discussions with the township and preparing the revisions to the calculations. On August 4th, we released the background study titled Development Charges Update Study. And then subsequent to preparing the update study, we received updated capital cost estimates for a few projects in the Stayner area for the water and wastewater services. And these were due to ongoing engineering work by the township's engineering consultants. So as the updated cost estimates were available, we updated the update study and released the addendum report on October 1st, 2021. And appended to that addendum study was also the draft amending bylaw. Tonight, October 18th, is the formal public meeting of council. And then it's anticipated that council will consider the amending bylaw at the next meeting on October 25th. So development charges are to recover the capital costs arising from growth. So new houses, new people come to a municipality, the township needs to build infrastructure to support that growth. And the development charges are to recover the capital costs of that infrastructure. And that's for residential as well as non-residential growth. So these capital costs are in addition to what would normally be constructed as part of a subdivision. So if we take a subdivision and you just kind of think of a number of houses, some internal roadways, some townhouses, etc., in the subdivision. Inside, there'll be roadways. Underneath, there'll be water mains, wastewater mains, etc. Those are typically constructed and paid for by the developing landowner. So as the developing landowner constructs the houses, before that, they will construct the infrastructure internal to the subdivision. That's their cost. Development charges are for the infrastructure required outside of that subdivision, typically, with some minor caveats. So for example, if there's a water supply outside of the community and a trunk water main is required to bring the water supply to the community, that trunk water main would then be included in the development charge calculation. Okay, and municipalities are empowered to impose these charges via the Development Charges Act. So as I mentioned, there was a number of changes to the legislation or the Development Charges Act since 2019, and we've listed them here. I'll refer to them under their bill numbers. As you can see, they get quite wordy after a while with the number of changes. So I will just go through them by one and just at a high level talk about what some of the changes are and how those changes are incorporated into the background study. So early in 2019, the province decided they wanted to refine or change the Development Charges Act. I won't go into too much detail because ultimately only a few sections of this bill were implemented and then was subsequently changed and revised and implemented through Bill 197. So the changes through Bill 108 that were ultimately implemented were generally twofold. So currently, and up until the changes, development charges were paid at first building permit. So when you go to construct your home, before you get the building permit, you would pay your development charge. Under the changes through Bill 108, certain types of development are allowed to pay in installment payments. So rental housing and institutional developments will pay DCs in 6 annual installment payments, or upon the first payment would be upon occupancy, and then they would pay over the next 5 years. For nonprofit housing developments, they actually pay over 21 installment payments, or the first payment upon occupancy, and then equal payments over the next 20 years. Now, the township is allowed to impose interest on these installment payments, and they would do that through an interest rate policy. So that's the first change, is the installment payments. The second change to the timing of the development charge collection would be the rate freeze, as we would refer to it. So if developments come through with a site plan application or a zoning bylaw amendment, these applications, they would submit them. Once the township receives that application, the development charge rate is frozen at that time at whatever the DC is when the municipality accepts the application. They then would await the township's approval of the application. Once the application is approved, the developing landowner would then have 2 years to pull their building permits to start construction on their houses. And if they pull their permit within that 2 years, then the rate is frozen. If it lapses and it takes longer than 2 years, then they're charged the rate at the time that they pull their building permits. Okay, and then interest is allowed to be imposed on the DC rate freeze as well. Now, with respect to Bill 138, very minor change. With respect to the installment payments, initially, they were also allowed to be imposed on commercial and industrial developments. And once the province heard feedback from municipalities, I think they revised that and took out commercial and took out industrial from requiring the installment payments. So then Bill 197 is the main piece of legislation that has changed the Development Charges Act. So the key changes here are the removal of the 10% deduction on certain services. And I'll speak to how that impacts the township's calculations in a minute. But these are the softer services. So parks and recreation, library, etc. In addition, the Development Charges Act used to only list what services were ineligible. So they went through and they listed museums, cultural facilities, etc., of what is ineligible for recovery under the development charges. with these changes from Bill 197, now they specifically list all of the services that are eligible. Hence why, as I mentioned earlier, we will be removing parking from the development charge calculation, as it's no longer one of those eligible services. And then lastly, I guess there's a couple more. So community benefit charges. So I won't go into too much detail here, as this would be a separate analysis. However, the province now implemented a community benefit charge. So municipalities, lower tier and single tier municipalities are able to impose a charge no higher than 4% of the market value of the land to recover for similar capital costs that are separate from the development charges. One thing is the upper tier are not allowed to impose a community benefit charge. And then lastly, with respect to the changes for Bill 197, the mandatory exemptions. So currently, if you have an existing home and you construct an additional unit within that existing home, as long as you don't double the size of the home, you would get an exemption from the development charge. What the province then changed is they've allowed that same exemption, but when you build a new home. So now you can build a new home and you can build an additional unit, and you would be exempt from the development charge on that additional unit. In addition, if you were to build or construct an ancillary residential building and you build a dwelling unit in that building, that would also be exempt from the development charge. Okay, and lastly, Bill 213, very minor, it's just a mandatory exemption for universities that receive funding from upper levels of government. So if they receive funding, then they're exempt from the development charge. Okay, so as I mentioned, a number of services are being updated in the township's development charge calculation and bylaw to remove the 10% mandatory deduction. And so this is parks and recreation services, library, parking, and studies. Now, one thing I'll note is, as well with the changes to the legislation, it now allows for a class of service to be established, which is really just a combination of all the other eligible services. So we've established growth studies as a class of service, which really just takes your existing administrative studies. We've called them growth studies, and we've allocated the different studies to the various eligible services as required. There's been some there's been an update to the fire services costs. And then, as I mentioned, costs for water, wastewater, and stormwater have also been updated. With respect to amendments to the bylaw, as I mentioned, parking services will then be a separate schedule in the bylaw, so that as of September 18th, 2022, the service will no longer be collected for under the development charge bylaw. And then policies with respect to the installment payments, the development charge rate freeze, and the interest that's applicable to those two. Policies with respect to those changes will now be incorporated into the bylaw. The mandatory exemption for additional units in new homes and ancillary units has been incorporated into the bylaw. The mandatory exemption for universities, as well as some other definitions to align with the changes to the legislation, as well as the regulations for the Development Charges Act. So this table, there's a lot in here, so I won't go over every number, but at a high level, I'll go over it. And then the next couple slides will actually compare the current charges as of the 2019 bylaw to the calculated charges through these update studies. So what we've done in these studies, because we are going to be amending the 2019 bylaw, is we've calculated everything in 2019 dollars, so that everything is kind of deflated to 2019, so everything aligns. So for the, we'll start off with the single and semi-detached dwellings in the rural area. So they're calculated to be about just under $8,800. And as the columns go across, we have the singles and semis. We have other multiples. So the townhouses would pay just under $7,000 a unit. Apartments, 2 bedrooms plus, would pay just over $5,000 a unit. Bachelor and 1 bedroom apartments, $3,500. Special care, special dwelling units, just under $3,200. And the non-residential charges would be $2.77 per square foot of gross floor area. And we've listed out the different urban areas in the municipality as well. And I'll touch on them a bit more as I go over the next couple slides. And as you can see, we've pulled out parking, which is calculated at $62 for a single and semi-detached dwelling. That would be removed as of September 18th, 2022. So to compare the charges, we've identified the current charges as per the bylaw. So this is as they were calculated in the bylaw. So in 2019 dollars in the first column. The second column is what was calculated as per the August 4th update study. And anything that's changed from the bylaw to the update study has been highlighted in that yellowy orange color. And then lastly, the third column with respect to the changes for the addendum report, you can see are highlighted in green. Those are the changes for the updated costs for the water supply and the wastewater collection for the Stainer area. So for single and semi-detached dwellings, in the rural area, as I mentioned, it's going from $8,200 to about $8,800. In the Stainer area, so if we look at the total near the bottom, it's going from about $29,000 up to about $34,000. Creemore, $23,000 to $32,000. And the New Lowell area, $18,500 up to the $19,000. Okay. With respect to non-residential charges per square foot, and we've noted at the bottom that as per the bylaw, parking, parks and recreation, library services, those are all exempt as per the bylaw. So we've just zeroed them out in these tables. So the charges for the rural area would be going from $2.64 up to about $2.77, just an increase of 13 cents per square foot. For the Stainer area, $10.44 per square foot up to just under $12 per square foot. The Creemore area, $9.63 up to $13.67 per square foot. And for the New Lowell area, $6.90 up to $7.03. So with respect to the process, we've undertaken the revisions to the calculations, released the studies in accordance with the legislation, released the addendum report and the draft bylaw. Tonight, October 18th, we're having the public meeting of council. And then the last step in the process is for council to receive the feedback from this evening's meeting and then consider the passage of the amending bylaw on October 25th. So the last few slides here, I just wanted to show a survey of the development charges applicable in Simcoe County. And what we have here, and I apologize if it's hard to see the colors here, but the bottom portion, the dark blue, is the lower tier, the local municipal charge. The next section, or the light blue, is the upper tier, the county charge. And the black box at the top, that represents the education development charges. So that we could compare the total charges for if you were to go construct a single detached dwelling in any one of these locations. Now, there's a number of area-specific areas in each of the municipalities. So we've taken a mix of if, for example, Innisfil has a number of different areas. So we've taken one at the higher end, one at the lower end, one in the middle, so that we get a general perspective. And so we can see if we go from left to right, Bradford, West Gwillimbury, in the Bond Head area, in total, it's just over $90,000 for a single detached home. And then you can see as we go down, we've got Innisfil, Barrie, Bradford, West Gwillimbury, New Tecumseth, before we hit the calculated charge for Stayner. So if we look at the red boxes, or the ready orange boxes, the current charge for Stayner is somewhere in the realm of, that's $45,000 for a single detached home. And with the recalculation of the charges, it's just under $50,000 for a single detached home. That's where the arrow is. And if we're looking at Creemore, so the charge is just under $40,000, about $39,000, and it's being recalculated up to about $47,000. When we look at New Lowell and when we look at the rural area, the relative position isn't changing relative to the other municipalities. However, the charge is going up because of that change to fire and the change to the 10% mandatory deduction being removed. And then when we look at the commercial development charges, similar themes are happening here. Up at the higher end, you have Barrie, Innisfil, New Tecumseth. Barrie's up just under $35 per square foot. And then it kind of drops down to about $27 per square foot. And then we come down to Creemore. And so if we look at the existing charge for Creemore, it's about $14 per square foot. And with the calculated charges, with the upper tier and the education, it's in and around $17 per square foot. Stayner, the relative position compared to the other municipalities isn't changing. However, the charge is going from about $15 per square foot up until about $16.50 per square foot. And then similar story with the rural and the New Lowell charges, slight increase, but no change in the relative position compared to the other municipalities. And then industrial, it's the same thing. The charges for the township of Clearview are the same. However, with industrial, there are a couple municipalities that exempt industrial. And so Aurelia and the Penetanguishene have zero development charges for industrial. Okay, and so that ends my presentation portion of the meeting. I'm happy to pass it back to you, Mr. Mayor, and happy to answer any questions that either the public or council has.
All right, thank you very much, Daryl. I appreciate that. Certainly a lot of detailed information. The best part about that, of course, is it is available on our part of our agenda, so people can refer to the actual details that are right in it. So thank you, Daryl, for that. Please stand by for any questions from members of council. At this time, I'll go to our clerk. Can the clerk please advise if there are any or anyone who has provided a request to make an oral submission that are in the waiting room of this Zoom meeting, since we're meeting virtually, and would they like to speak about the amending bylaw? Madam Clerk, do you have anybody prepared to present?
Thank you, Mayor Measure. So I can confirm that no members of the public wish to make any oral submission during tonight's public meeting.
All right. Well, there you go. Thank you very much, Ms. Helmke. Very good. So, at this time, we'll go directly then to our members of council. It's a lot of material to hear all at once here. I'm glad we had an opportunity to review it as it was part of our agenda. So I'll ask if there's any members of council have any questions that they would like to pose to Mr. Abs or actually any of our staff about the development charges. Okay, I see Tom Patterson and then I see Doug McKechnie. Mr. Patterson, please go right ahead.
A couple of things. I'll take it one at a time and go through it. First thing, could you just walk through, actually, just want to make sure I understand the rate freeze provisions, because that's a big one. Up until now, we've been able to charge the DC of the day, and now we can't. So the rate freeze starts at the site plan submittal. Now, that means it could be a lot of time before the approval. And then there's 2 years after that. Is there any limit to the time between the submittal of the site plan and when it's approved?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's no limit in the Development Charges Act with respect to that. I'm not 100% sure if there's any limit in terms of the Planning Act, which might limit the timelines for the approval of the application. However, with respect to the Development Charges Act, there is no time limit on that piece.
Okay, because I don't know if the mayor or someone from our planning is here, but I don't know what the standard larger subdivision gap is. Oftentimes it take a while. Like I can think of a couple that took years. Even though I guess what protects us a little bit is the fact that we can charge interest. We don't charge interest, we build interest into the charge when it's applicable.
Councillor Patterson, we do have members of our staff present. Mara Burton is here. I believe Kelly McDonald, our treasurer, may want to contribute to that conversation as well. So I'll turn it to Mara. Perhaps Mara, you would like to address Mr. Patterson's question?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson. So I just want to be clear on the question first, but if it's a timeline and how long it takes site plans to, because I think you talked about site plans and subdivisions, we would certainly hope that we get site plans done within 2 years. I think it wouldn't, it would be very unusual for a site plan to take really much longer than a year. Hopefully we can do them in 6 months to 9 months is what we try to do. Subdivision approval from application, and I'm presuming that these are complete applications that are being made, would take about 12 months, again, depending on the circumstances.
Thanks. Just so we're not, didn't confuse you. When I mentioned subdivision, I didn't mean the subdivision draft plan. What I meant was site plan that's involved in the subdivision application. So, but they're cumulative. My understanding is there's a time frame between when the site plan is submitted and when it's approved. And in this case, council approves it. And then once approval, you have 2 years to pull the building permit. So the question I'm asking is, typically it could be, as you said, Mara, could be 3 years that the freeze is in. 1 year for the site plan approval and 2 years after that.
Yeah, if I can, for subdivision, for them to take a building permit out, not only do they get their application and they get their draft plan approval, but then they do a registration where they would do their development agreement. And in some cases, that's a site plan agreement if it's like, say, a planned condominium or something like that. But if it's a traditional subdivision, it would be a subdivision agreement. Mm-hmm. And then once they've entered into the subdivision agreement, put up all of their securities and so on, then they actually have to do the construction to get the roads in and the infrastructure in before they can actually get building permits. So that could take another year, depending on the circumstances, or it kind of just depends on how that goes. But I don't think you're wrong with your timelines necessarily.
All right, and then the interest charge, it's built into, depending on how long the current rate was being frozen, that's built into the rate when it's charged, the first building permit.
Through your worship,
we're not charging them an interest rate on money to be given to us in the meantime. Like we're not charging for lost revenue, for example, or how is the interest charge fee? How is the interest charged?
All right, Tom, I think I'm getting where you're coming from. Kelly, Ms. McDonald, do you have a comment on that about when we actually charge interest?
Through your worship, to Councillor Patterson and Daryl, please correct me if I'm wrong. So once that rate freeze goes into effect, we're permitted to start charging interest based on the interest rate policy passed by council. And that was why I pushed for the fluctuating rate, yes. Just because there's a potential of it being years before we actually see the money. So we
Right,
want to be,
exactly.
we
Yeah.
want to be capturing that lost revenue over the years, and at least covering the indexing, if nothing less.
Let's go to Daryl directly before Tom. Daryl, is that, you concur with that sort of review from the treasurer?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's accurate. Yep.
All right, Tom?
Thank you. I have another question, but I'll let someone else ask.
Well, okay. Doug McKechnie, you're up next. Just questioning, is there anybody else? Okay, I'll go to Doug next. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks very much. And Daryl, just for you, slide number, we'll start about 10 there, the comparison of rates, residential, single detached, and then the next slide after that as well. I got a little bit lost there. I understand that slide, and I understand how it relates down to the bar graph down below there too. The only thing is, when you were going through the slides on 10, slide number 10 and slide number 11, which is the comparison of rates residential, and the next one, comparison of rates non-residential, you were giving numbers that were different from what was on the slide. At least to me, you were you reading off of something else? Because you lost me there, because you weren't giving the same numbers that was on the slide, so you sort of lost me.
Daryl, I'll give you a chance to show that slide again if you think you need to, or perhaps you can answer Mr. McKechnie.
Yes, not a problem.
I understand the slide. It was the numbers that you verbally gave, and I'm thinking, oh, where's he getting those? I don't see how he gets those.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's through you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll just kind of go over this quickly. And I understand that makes total sense. This slides 10 and 11 are actually the Clearview Township's charges. So if we take let's take the $19,000 for New Lowell, okay? And then if we flip to the bar graph for New Lowell, the $19,000 is the dark blue. So the charges, or the dollars that I was referring to, are the total. So the dark blue would relate back to the slide 10, and then the light blue and the black box above are in addition to what the township charges. So it's the county as well as the education development charges.
Okay.
So I was just kind of off the top of my head, just eyeballing where it is in general.
Mr. McKechnie.
Okay. I understand that. It took me a while there too, because I had to go back and forth in those slides to figure that out. But okay, I got it now. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, nothing further, Doug? Okay.
No, that's good.
All right. I'll give the opportunity to anybody else on council have a question. All right, Tom, I'm going to come right back to you. You said you had a couple more. You go right ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just walk through, I think I understand I'm going to take the Creemore changes from the current bylaw to the calculated. And the wastewater services take quite a jump, and that's because of our wastewater situation. Is there anything else? Is that totally responsible? Is that totally account for the changes in terms of the plant updates? Or are there smaller things in there as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so on, I believe it's page 4-27 of the update study. The August 4th update study. I'm not exactly sure what page of the agenda that is.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Perfect. So there's two highlighted projects there, and really only one highlighted project. Project number 7 is included in the development charge calculation, but you can see it's quite substantial cost that's been added to the calculations. It's about $4.7 million included of DC eligible costs. So that has been added from the last time. So this is information that's been provided through the township's engineering consultants, and they've identified this need for the treatment plant upgrades for the growth in the Creemore area.
I'm sorry, Tom, I think you muted. I was wondering if Mike Ron might want to help out with perhaps some of that review. I think Daryl was referring to
Yeah.
information that Mike might have right at his fingertips. Tom? Let's go
Yeah,
to Mike.
I just said that in
Oh,
mute.
sorry.
Okay.
Mike, how are you?
Thank you, Richard. I'm at my fingertips, no, but
Okay, well, you've got a
Patterson's
terrific
correct.
setup there with your computer, so I think you could be able to find it.
Well, I could, but I didn't anticipate the question, so it should have been in front of me already.
Fair enough.
So the wastewater plant, 2019, the last time we updated this study, there was an assumption that the plant could handle growth up to its first stage of 860. Obviously, since then we found out it cannot. Development has to pay for the upgrades required to service it. So although not finalized, we did have to come up with a number. The number that's been added, we feel is appropriate to have somebody upstairs. The numbers are supposed to accommodate the amount of growth to that same stage that was presented in 2019, which I believe was around 565 units. We do think at this point, though, moving forward, when this study is updated again in 2024, we'll probably have a larger update shooting for the stage 2, 1,400 cubic meters a day. But we're a few years away from finalizing that solution at the Creamwater Sewage Treatment Plant.
Just stand by there, Mike. Tom, is that comfortable with you?
Yeah, so I think I think you answered the question. I think we don't know the full cost of the upgrade to the plant, but we do know the growth of the 565. And so I guess we know enough about the cost to get us to that stage. So we're really prorating the development charges based on or phasing in the development charges as our growth is coming up. Is that what we're doing? We're prorating the cost of the full cost of the sewage plant upgrade this time around. And then in 2024, we'll know a little bit more and we'll have more growth, and that'll justify the next increase in the DCs.
Tom, let's go to Mike on that. Go ahead, Mike.
Certainly. Councillor Patterson, through the chair. Yeah, so the number, we always use numbers that have been documented. So the original Burnside estimate of approximately $10 million to upgrade that plant to bring it back to expected capacity.
Yeah.
We start with those numbers. We attribute 25 or whatever the percentage was, I can't recall now, 25 or 30% we attribute to existing, because it's a benefit to existing because
right.
The users of the system also have to contribute to that upgrade. We are expecting a potential influx from one of our large industrial users. That's not been finalized. So the number that's in this study is an expectation based on some assumptions. And yes, when we get to when we revise these studies, I don't want to call them guesses. They're best calculations known. We don't know the ultimate solution, but we're using the best information we have right now to put a number in there.
Thank you.
Great. Daryl, do you have anything else to add to that? That's a good point that Mr. Ron brings up, that engineering can be adjusted, but we do make our best estimates based on the knowledge that we have at the time and making best estimates with experience, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. And with the what we try to do with the development charge is that the listing of the capital projects and the capital needs is really the capital needs to service the growth that's anticipated. So if we're looking at growing by a certain number of people, we're trying to identify what the capital needs are to service that growth. And so that's where Project 7 and Project 8 on that list, they're both the treatment plant upgrades, but they're separated because the first set of upgrades is for the growth that's within the forecast period. And then project number 8 is the next set of upgrades to add the capacity for the growth that's beyond the forecast period. So we try to align the growth with the capital needs as best as we can with the information we have available.
Great. I appreciate that. That's good commentary there. Thank you. Tom, anything further, Tom? Still give you the floor. You're good. Thank you very much. Anybody else on council got any questions? Yes, Ms. Leishman. Councillor Leishman, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's not really a question, it's just a bit of an observation. When I was reading the bylaw, I noticed that tiny homes were mentioned. And I do know that we have a bylaw that says we can't have anything under 1,000 square feet. So I got a little curious to wonder why it's in here. And I phoned Mara and she said that they're hoping that we will have tiny homes one day. And they will be DC charges the same as unit apartments, or apartment units, whatever. And so I read through it a bit more and I realized that what she was saying is true, but I think that's a good move. I'd like to see that one day. My granddaughter wants to live in a tiny home and I think that would be a really nice thing to tell her that maybe one day we will do that. Anyway, it was just an observation. And I want to thank you, Daryl, for this. This is wonderful. It explains a lot of things. Even reading it, it was great, but having to go back and forth from acts and bylaws and things like that, it's a bit confusing. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Good comments there, Councillor Leishman. I appreciate that. I also would like to see that added to our plans in the future. Listen, is there anybody else with any other questions or comments? All right, if I may, as chair, I do have one question and comment. I'd like to go to Mr. Abs. Daryl, if you could you call up your page 13 of your presentation, which has the chart with the slope on it, with all the various neighboring municipalities? Yeah. There you go. That'll do. I've asked this question to your associate, Mr. Gary Scanlon, when he's made this type of presentation to our council in the past. And so I just want to ask you again, and I already know the answer, but I'm hoping that you can explain it again for both members of council and members of the public. The location of what is now being projected as to what our DC charges would be, located where you have it now on the chart, indicated underneath greens and reds. As you go through this process for other municipalities update their DC bylaws, and they also then move along to the left of the chart. And as they increase their DC bylaws, they'll change. So over a period of time, the positioning of each of these municipalities will be variable. Certainly, let's just state that the large urban centers in Simcoe County, our friends at Bradford, West Gwillimbury, City of Barrie, Innisfil, and so on, generally see a high level of development charge as a result of their extensive services that they also provide. So, Daryl, perhaps you can help me explain to citizens that the positioning that you have on this chart will vary every 3 to 4 to 10 months as you do this type of study. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. A prime example here is Springwater. Actually, just released their background study, made that publicly available, and they will be looking to update their charges as well. So, they could be moving along that axis, as you mentioned, just in a few short months. So yes, development charges, especially right now with the changes to legislation, a lot of municipalities are updating their development charges. But every 5 years, municipalities have to take a look and update their development charge studies and their development charge bylaws. And so they look at their capital needs and they look at their growth, and they try to recover as much of the growth-related costs from the new growth as possible to limit the impact on the existing taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. So my comment is actually meant to point out that while we, if council moves ahead with this, we may move our positioning to a higher level by actually adding more fees to DCs, but that doesn't mean that we're not remaining competitive in the DC, scale when it comes to our neighboring municipalities and the services that we provide. We're still a rural community with agriculture as our primary economic driver. And so as a result, we will always remain in that lower section, over time, for sure, because that's the type of services that are available to a municipality like ours that we can provide. Whereas we're not an urban center with multiple recreation centers and multiple facilities and transportation and infrastructure concerns. We do have some of those for sure, and that's why we take this role seriously, and we have to be cautious with how we spend money. But just to point out that we are competitive in this market, and so this is not something that people or the citizens should take, that suddenly we're rising in our DC fees and everybody else isn't. They're all going to be rising as we move through this process. Thank you, Daryl. All right. Is there any members of council with any questions on that bit of discussion there? Other than that, Daryl, you can clear your screen, and thank you very much. Is there anything else, members of council, that we have for Mr. Abbs or members of our staff that are joining us? Yes, Councillor Patterson, you're still there. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, I assume there's nothing different except accounting under the new statutes when the developers pay upfront their DCs and we discount them. We just make all the adjustments in the finance. Is that correct?
Mr. Abbs?
Yes, that's correct. There's no change if developing landowners want to prepay their development charges. There's no change to that.
Yeah, there's a formula for doing that, and it's well prescribed, and certainly this municipality has taken advantage of the cooperation we get from larger developers that want to do that. So, all right, thanks, Tom, for that point. Yes,
if I may, Mr. Mayor. In addition, with respect to those installment payments and the DC rate freeze, if a developing landowner wants to enter into an agreement to either pay the charge early or late or at a certain time, then the municipality has the ability to negotiate the terms, and there's no more requirement to undertake the installment payments if you enter into a Section 27 agreement to pay early or late. So there is some flexibility there if they want to pay early. So
great, that's great. Okay, very positive. Thank you very much for that. All right, members of council, if I see nothing further, Madam Clerk, I don't think there's anything further. So then council, at this point, I will conclude the public meeting with respect to the municipality's proposed development charges, amending bylaw, and underlying background study. We want to thank those that have provided comments for their interest in this matter, and these comments will be considered by council prior to the enactment of an amended development charges bylaw. So at this point, then, I will officially close the public meeting. That returns us to our regular agenda of council. And so, council, on our agenda, we have item number 4, the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of this meeting. I'll read that, look for a mover and seconder. Recommendation, be it resolved that bylaw number 21-107, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the October 18, 2021 council meeting, special council meeting, be presented and read a first, second, and third time, finally passed on the 18th day of October 2021. A mover and seconder on the bylaw, please. Ms. Leishman, Mr. Walker, thank you. And you've heard the bylaw. I'm prepared to call it. All those in favor? And the bylaw carries. Thank you very much, council. Council, our next item is our motion to adjourn. If there's nothing further, I'll read that. Recommendation be it resolved, the council meeting be adjourned at 7:24 p.m. Mover and seconder. Mr. Lamers, Ms. Deneen, thank you. All those in favor? And that calls our adjournment. Thank you very much to council. Thank you to our staff. Thank you to Mr. Abbs for your presentation tonight. And we wish